Ngicela bazalwane ukukhuluma kafishane. Ngidawenda lesihloko lesithi a generation, we are raising a generation after God's heart. Nawuthanda ukuthi sifunze na ungakhona ube neliphepha nepen kunyeni la sitawufunza khona but nje nasingaba nalokubhala sitokhona ukuthi sibambe isikhathi semfundisi. Mark 10 verse 13 to 16. The people brought children to Jesus hoping he might touch them. The disciples shooed them off, but Jesus was irate and let them know it. Don't push these children away. Don't even get between them and me. These children are at the very center of life in the kingdom. Mark this, unless you accept God's kingdom in the simplicity of a child, you'll never get in. Then, gathering the children up in his arms, he laid his hands on them and blessed them. Banfana basenhlitweni yaNkulunkulu. Banfana basenhlitweni yaNkulunkulu. Kuko konke lesingaba busy ngako sikukhumbule ukuthi banfana basenhlitweni yaNkulunkulu. Kulesikhathi samanje banfana basekhaya banesidunge sebadziniwe kudlala bodwa sebaqale eganga seba frustrated. Ngifuna lokuthi sikunderstand ukuthi labantwana baku what frame of mind njenganyalo. Batali labanye basemakhaya labanye baphelelwe imisebenzi kune stress ekhaya. Labanye bantwana iBhayibheli abazange sebakelive ekhaya baligcine la sonweni. Labanye abati ukuthi kuthandaza yini ekhaya bagcina nakuthandazwa la sonweni. Simo lesibhlungu emakhaya ngebantwana. Simo lesibhlungu kubantu labasenhlitweni yaNkulunkulu. Namhla ekseni ngidothi bantwana can change lesimo lesi. Lele sisibona thina sicakekile bantwana labane solution yalesimo lesi. Ngoba basenhlitweni yaNkulunkulu. Mane sidinga lokuconza ukuthi banjani leNkulunkulu, uNkulunkulu nakabona bona ubona ini. Labanye bethu kumbe nasibuka abantu bethu, we don't see destiny changers. We don't see game changers. Siboni expense ngoba lo mfana ngamthola ngingamcabangeli, ngingamhleleli. So nangibuka lo mfana ngibona school fees, ngibona sondla inhlitiyo ibami babhlungu. Angisakwathi nekhuluma kahle nemfana because natinfo lengidibonako. Ngicela ukuthi namhla ngi-invite batali ukuthi bangakhi batali abafuna ukuthi raising a godly generation, a generation after God's heart. I'm a mother, my cry ukuthi Nkosi, may I raise a child after your heart. We may have the houses and the cars and the money. It will not make them children after God's heart. So what do we need to do? For today, I'll just speak on one thing. We need to be intentional about raising godly children. It doesn't happen by default. You need to be intentional. What does it mean to be intentional? It means your thoughts, your beliefs, your desires, your hopes, they are all directed and focused towards this child, on this child being a godly child. Akubi nje kumele lokuthi lengcondo lenhlitiyo lokuthandaza kwakho lokulila kwakho kukhulume ngalomfana phambi kwaNkulunkulu. That is being intentional about children. I'll make a few examples bazalwane ndawuzama kubamba isikhathi babe. Number one, I'll talk about Abraham. When it was time for Isaac to have a wife, Abraham was intentional about the kind of wife his son could take. Akazange nje aqhamuka Isaac sekathi yebabe ngiyathatha. The parent was intentional. The parent knew ukuthi ufuna ini ngemfanakhe. Genesis 24 verse 4 ndakuthiwa lapho bazalwana ngeke nganze ngakho. But that is where we see Abraham an intentional parent about the destiny yemfanakhe. Number two, I'll talk about Mordecai. Mordecai bekangimalume ngeSiswati, but he was intentional about the destiny of Esther. That is found in Esther 2 verse 10. That ifunzele ekhaya baba. But lesibona ngaMordecai, Esther was a Jew. They were slaves where they were. The king needed a wife. Mordecai stood up, wathi umshana wami. Wami umshana. Even though she's a slave here. But wami umshana. Because he was intentional about the destiny of Esther. And what we see Mordecai doing, little Bible, look verse 21. verse 11. Every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Onke malanga beka hamba funa kuva sikwentekalani nga-Esther. Asengabi Queen Esther, but Mordecai bese kangasahlaliseki athandaza atihlupha ngalomvana. Intentional. That was Mordecai nga-Esther. Wathi noma sangenile Esther sekunengoti sebafuna kulala inkomo. Mordecai wakhona ukuthi Esther na ingoti yeda. Esther knew what to do. Esther understood ukuthi malume uyangithandza and trusted Mordecai. Lokunye lengubonako lana was Esther was even able to dare death. Athi nangabe kuyafiwa ngife. But malume uthide. Nyalo sima na uNkulunkulu wamalume. Intentional. Moving on to the next example. Maria, Mage wa Jesu. We are not told about her upbringing. But what we are told was Mary listens to an angel. Walalela ingelozi. Luke 1 verse 38. Uthi Mary kule ngelozi, behold the maidservant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word. Here is a young woman lovuma lihlazo. Here is a young woman lovuma kuthi nangabe uyaxoshwa emangweni uyaxoshwa. Here is a young woman locisha umthatho. Ukucitha konke because the angel has spoken. What is this telling us about batali bakhe nokumkhulisa kwakhe? Bebakhulume bathini ngaNkulunkulu abatali kulomfana ezakhula. Atoza lalela ingelozi. Nabe wama ngayiva yini? So ngabe konke bekulisitha nje bese uyavelelwa nje eMary uyavuma nje nakumitha. Angalali nemuntu. There was something that was planted in her as a girl by her parents. There was something they taught her. There was something they said to her. Nkulunkulu bekangakhulumi ngaleto khathi, but Mary weva ingilozi khuluma. Second last example. John. Utalwa nguZachariah na Elizabeth. Batali be John were given a manual about how to raise John. Batali ba John sought a manual from God ukuthi John simkhulise njani. Batali ba John didn't accept ukuthi nangilomnye umfana sokhona akachubeka impilo. They got a manual. John ngeke azadle ini. John utawuhamba phi? John utawendani? Sitifunile yini ngebantwa bethu ukuthi thini manual yaNkulunkulu ngalabantwana. Washumayela endle John, wakhona njani John kukwenta konke lokhu, kulihlazo kokugcoka sikhumba, udle luju bani badla konke, wakuvuma lo mfana wakuvumiswa yini? The parents were intentional. The parents were praying. The parents were talking to the child. Ukhula uyadadi, idestiny yakho uyayadi ukuthi mina ngidomemetela Jesu, angeteli kutova bomnanzi bemhlaba. Last example. Moses. But Dalbaka were intentional about his destiny as well. He was born at a time lapho ngaphosa ngibekisengana iCovid. Ngoba bekubulawa abantwana. Wathi makwakhe ngeke wami. Nangabe kubita aye ekhathi elwandle noma ngeke wami. The mother was intentional about the destiny of this child. The mother fought. The parents fought. Ngingamshiyi ngaphandle babe ngoba ngeke kude nguvile lokugabi ngababe. Kepha lengizama ukuchaza labazwana ukuthi lo make wathandaza washiya umfana wakhe la kunetingwenya nako konke lokunye lesingakwadi kepha wamati uNkulunkulu wakhe ukuthi wami umfana utamvikela wami umfana ngeke aphelele la wema lo make kwafuna tingwenya nako konke lokuhlala emandini kuhloniphe ukuthi lo make sokhulumile ngemfana wakhe labatali balile kwasinoma kuchamuka umfana Faro amthatha lo mfana wavuma singicela ukukhulisela. She had 3 years. Only 3 years ikufida umfana live la uNkulunkulu. Sine bantu bethu sibakhulise how many years kepha balade. But yena she had to. Kwafuna agcishe lo yamaka ngiyayifisa inhlitiyo yakhe because she knew ukuthi umfana wakhe uyalela khona khona tithixo. Uyalela abangamati khona uNkulunkulu. Kepha ngifuna wama kubhodle kusasa. Kuphume lele ngikufaka konyalo. So umbuto lenginawo ukuthi lo mama kwakhe wamfundisa kuthini lo mfana. Ngiyafisa kwathi nami ngidofundisa abami. Kepha-ke sengendlulile lapho, ngicazisa 5 minutes engimthethe, ngiyaxolisa. Sekulesikhathi lengibekelwe sona. How do we do it? How do we do it? How do we get intentional with our kids? 2 things. You teach your children scripture every day. Banfana kumcwa ukuthi balive every day. Deuteronomy 6 verse 7 uNkulunkulu yala abantwana baka-Israyeli ukuthi bawubafundzisa abantwana live labo. Ukhulume nabo when they sit, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. All the time teach your children the word. Emakhaya ngenda njani? I'll give you practical examples. Thatha livesi, uthatha ikhalenda la ngemuva, lele seyigugile leya last year. Bhala leli verse ngemarker, uyibeke le calendar lamva kwesivalo la kamereni la bantwana. Na ungene ekseni niyafunza kanye kanye. Nababuya kogeza entsambama niyafunza kanye. It's behind their door, it's in their vicinity. Lokumahala nje. Lo mfana sone live la lifunzako. Noma sacela kulokunye uthi awu recite leli verse leli kamereni. Kunkhani ngunika. You are instilling something ukuthi leli verse kufanele bela enhlitweni yalo mfana. That's number 1. Number 2, you pray for them and you pray with them. Ephesians 6 verse 18. Noma angifundza Lamentations 2 verse 9, verse lami legcina mfundisi. Lithi, as each night watch begins, get up and cry out in prayer. Pour your heart out face to face with the Master. Lift high your hands. Beg for the lives of your children who are starving to death out on the streets. Since Bazare, we understand because the children in the streets are our children. This little verse, beg for the lives of your children. We need to get to a point, Bazane, where we understand we need to pray for our children. If you are raising destiny setters, trend setters, children who are changing everything, children who will build trains in Swaziland, it calls for intentionality, flag it. Then we can raise those children. Can I cut it short, Babe Namotla? Thanks.